Why has racism been so dominant in our life? What is it about African?
It's about feeling good. I mean, racists...
You need to feel that you are better than someone, and
Some people
so
do.
with every ethnic group that comes to America,
Oh,
it's
sure.
African Americans who they need to feel better.
Oh, yeah, they made some changes, but there was always, in other words, if a German or an Italian or whomever came to this country trying to Americanize himself, he could sort of stay with Germans or stay with Italians or stay with Irish people, which in fact frequently they did. But in order to become an American, to have consort with, easy relationships with people from other parts of Europe, the one thing that could unify you is that you were no longer an Italian. Now you're white. That was the unifying stroke. If all of those people from Europe, who weren't white in Europe, but they got white here,
and
that was the lesson.
That gave them a unity.
That's right.
And it gave them a bond with a group. It gave them something that made set them apart.
It became whiteness as ideology.
Arthur Ashe was here, the late Arthur Ashe,
yes.
and he said to me, as he said in one other place, he said, in a much quoted comment, he said, living with AIDS is easier than living with racism. It's a harder struggle against racism for me than it is against AIDS. What it meant to me is that there's no way for the rest of us to understand that daily encounter. Which brings me to my question to you. Do you still have that encounter? Do you, Toni Morrison, Pulitzer Prize winner, successful, honored in the halls of academe, etc., still have that encounter?
Yes, I do, Charlie, but let me tell you, that's the wrong question.
Okay, what's the right question?
How do you feel? Not you, Charlie Rose,
Right.
but don't you understand that the people who do this thing, who practice racism,
Right.
are bereft? There is something distorted about the psyche. It's a huge waste, and it's a corruption and a distortion. It's a profound neurosis that nobody examines for what it is. It feels crazy. It is crazy. And it has just as much of a deleterious effect on white people, and possibly equal as it does black people. I always knew that I had the moral high ground all my life. I always thought those people who said I couldn't come in the drugstore and I had to sit in these funny places, I couldn't go in the park.
You felt morally superior to them from day one.
And I thought they knew that I knew that they were inferior to me morally. I always thought that. And my parents always thought that. But if the racist white person, I don't mean the person who is examining his consciousness and so on, doesn't understand that he or she is also a race, it's also constructed, it's also made, and it also has some kind of serviceability. But when you take it away, I take your race away. And there you are, all strung out, and all you got is your little self. And what is that? What are you without racism? Are you any good? Are you still strong? You still smart? You still like yourself? I mean, these are the questions. Part of it is, yes, the victim, how terrible it has been for black people.
But you don't like that.
I'm not a victim. I refuse to be one.
And the victim is the other person who is morally inferior and
that's
who
a
has
serious
to hold
question.
on to
Of course.
racism
if you
to
have
somehow
to hold, that's
for his or her own self-esteem and definition.
If you can only be tall because somebody's on their knees, then you have a serious problem. And my feeling is white people have a very, very serious problem. And they should start thinking about what they can do about it. Take me out of it.
Then give white people some free advice.
They're all in my books.
And the advice is to come to grips
Of course.
with your own fears.
Absolutely.
Your own
Look at
fears.
it. Absolutely. Your own fears, your own history, and what you need. What do you need this for? You know, it's not, I said glibly a moment ago, well, it feels good. It must feel good, otherwise they'd give it up. It's wasteful.
Right.
It costs a lot. It's ugly. It hurts. What are you paying for that for?
Driven by fear.
That's right.
Yeah. Give me your take on Rodney King and Los Angeles and all of that experience.
The most remarkable thing to me about Rodney King and what happened afterwards was people kept saying, oh, this terrible explosion, oh, the riots, oh, this is awful and could have been avoided, or what is it about? What struck me most about the people who were burning down shops and stealing was how long they waited. The restraint, not the spontaneity, the restraint. You realize the moment to be anarchic was when we saw those tapes. When we first saw those tapes.
They waited for justice.
They waited. How long was that? 9 months, a year? Yeah. They waited for justice almost a year and didn't come. No one talks about the fact that no one ran out into the streets as I wanted to. I was sitting in there with my son. It was like a ballet. It was unbelievable. And I think everybody felt that way. And no one, they didn't do a thing. They waited. That's amazing. That's amazing to me.
It's always shocking. And I insist on being shocked. I'm never going to become immune. I think that's a kind of failure, to see so much of it that you die inside. I want to be surprised and shocked every time.
You have in your writing certainly marginalized whites. Why are they of no particular interest to you, or seemingly no particular interest?
Well, I was interested in another kind of literature that was not just confrontational, black versus white. I was really interested in black readership. And I wanted to do, I think, for me, the allegory or the parallel is black music, which is as splendid and complicated and wonderful as it is, because its audience was within its primary audience. The fact that it has become universal, worldwide, anyone, everyone can play it, and it has evolved, is because it wasn't tampered with and editorialized within the community. So I wanted the literature that I wrote to be that way. I could just go straight to where the soil was, where the fertility was in this landscape. And also, I wanted to feel free not to have the white gaze in this place that was so precious to me, which is the work.
And you will maintain this safe place for yourself, for your art? You don't think you will ever change and write books that incorporate white lives into them substantially?
I have done.
In a substantial way?
You can't understand how powerfully racist that question is, can you? Because you could never ask a white author, when are you going to write about black people? Whether he did or not, or she did or not. Even the inquiry comes from a position of being in the center.
And being used to being in the center.
And being used to being in the center. And saying, you know, is it ever possible that you will enter the mainstream? It's inconceivable that where I already am is the mainstream.
Oh, no, that wasn't the implication of my question. I think you are very, very much in the mainstream. It's a question of the subject of your narrative, whether you want to alter the parameters of it, whether you see any benefit in doing that, or will you clearly see disadvantages in doing it from your own point of view?
Artistic disadvantages. There are no pluses for me. Being an African-American writer is sort of like being a Russian writer who writes about Russia, in Russian, for Russians. And the fact that it gets translated and read by other people is a benefit. It's a plus. But he's not obliged to ever consider writing about French people or Americans or anybody.
When we were talking earlier about you being or not being in the mainstream, you are sure in the mainstream when it comes to public acclaim.
I can't tell you how satisfying it is to know that I have earned a readership that is that large as it is. I stood at the border, stood at the edge, and claimed it as central. Claimed it as central. And let the rest of the world move over to where I was.
And this grand thing, the Nobel Prize.
That's grand.
I imagine it is a wonderful thing to receive. Does that alter people's attitudes towards you?
Sometimes, yes. Oh, yeah. All prizes do, but particularly that one. Sometimes they respond to you as though you weren't a person, as though everything you said was sort of capable of being carved into marble. It was so stunning, a surprise to me. I felt very representational. I felt American for probably the first time in my life. I felt representative of all African Americans, and I felt hugely a woman receiving this prize, because that's not too common in the halls of the Nobel, alumni. So I felt all those things, knowing full well, as one always does, that no prize has ever made it easier. You still have to look at that blank page, and all of that was always going to be my problem.
Leaving all of that to one side, the publicity and all the rest of it, the acclaim, do you these days sit back when you're writing, read over a phrase that you've just written and say, my God, that's beautiful?
Occasionally. I'm aware of what's very beautiful, things that I think came off really well. And I'm also aware of the sentences that I have written that at last I know how I should rewrite them, even long after the book's been published.
Toni Morrison, it's been great. Pleasure meeting you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.